Okay, time series fundamentals, one of those hot topics. Particularly if you're a Modano user, one of the critical scoping decisions you're going to have to make is whether to use a historical forecast piece of kit or a forecast only model. Now, there's a third type that has no time, such as a product strategy model. We're not going to get into those here. The main focus here is trying to help you decide on whether you want one model or another, just to talk about some of the pros and cons and, when a forecast only piece of kit is a better option than a more traditional kind of historical forecast FP&A style model. Now, for this scoping series, this is one of the few videos where we're actually going to get into Excel just to illustrate quite a nitty-gritty fundamental aspect of a forecast only versus the historical forecast model. So what I've got here are a couple of examples. I've got a 10-year forecast only model that runs from 2000 to 2010. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a revenue number for each of these periods that reflects the year, so as you can see the impact of columns and data and time series movement relative to the data that I've entered. So in the first instance, we've got our data points. Now, if I were to roll this model forwards, so as I go through time, I'm going to change my start date. If I change it from 2000 to 2001, what you'll see is all of the data points that I previously had in there are now in the wrong columns. So what I now need to do for this model is go through a process of assumption movement to get the data back to a more logical location. Now, for an annual model, this isn't such a problem because I might be running a strategic piece and I might want to actually zero base my assumptions and start again comprehensively. However, if you're looking at something like a monthly model or even a deal model where there's a higher frequency of change, you don't want to be doing this process every month. If the date of the deal changes, the last thing you want is to have to move all these assumptions left 3 columns. So a forecast only model, as you go through time, the assumptions are going to become out of date in terms of their column location relative to the time periods that they're showing. By comparison, if I show you the same model in a historical forecast structure, what you'll see is the location of my data in the column relative to the time period stays consistent. So for example, with this model, again, similar kind of structure, 10 years, 2000 to 2010, and each of the revenue items is located within each year, so as you can see the consistency. With this model, what I'm now doing is, to the extent that I've moved through the year and I'm now at the end of, say, 2000, my change is actually going to have a hide show impact on the model, so that all that actually happens is I can no longer see the columns that were previously forecast and are now historical. So the benefit of a rolling historical forecast model is that you don't have to move your assumptions around as frequently. The data tends to stay in the column to which it is associated, even as you roll the model forwards through time. In addition to this, a historical forecast model typically has a much better life expectancy. They tend to be implemented into the business, and they've got that recurring rolling mechanism whereby every period they're updated for the latest set of actuals. They don't have an onerous assumption movement requirement, and they tend to just hum along very nicely. To that extent, people often wonder why on earth you would build a forecast only model when historical forecast models have such a benefit. And the reason why is that historical forecast models have denser logic. So with a forecast only bit of kit, for any one period of analysis I'm looking at, conditionally I know that is always forecast only. By comparison, a historical forecast model has much denser logic. So in any instance, I need to look and say, am I a historical period, in which case go and get a data set from somewhere else? Or am I a forecast period, in which case do some sort of calculation? So there's pros and cons structurally to forecast only analysis versus historical forecast models.